Hey everyone. Tonight we're going to step into a world lit by tallow candles and ruled by the sword. Imagine the air in northern Italy, thick with the morning mist rolling off the Po River. You can smell the damp earth, the wood smoke from 100 cooking fires and something else. The faint metallic scent of change. You're standing on the ruins of one empire, watching a new, unfamiliar kingdom of warriors stitch itself together, one brutal blood feud at a time. And let's be honest, you probably wouldn't survive the trip to the local market, let alone a dynastic feud. The concept of germ theory is centuries away, and a minor infection from a splinter is a potential death sentence. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is for you. I always find it fascinating to see where we all are in the world. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The year is somewhere in the late 580s. You pull your cloak tighter, not just against the chill, but against the sheer strangeness of it all. This is Italy, but it doesn't feel like the Italy of senators and legions you've read about. The great Roman roads are still here, yes, but their elegant paving stones are cracked and sprouting weeds. A magnificent stone aqueduct might still loom on the horizon, but it's a dry, crumbling skeleton, its purpose forgotten by the people living in its shadow. They're building with wood now, mostly. Great, smoky halls with thatched roofs are rising near the shells of abandoned marble villas. This is the kingdom of the Lombards. They arrived about 20 years ago, a Germanic people who swept down from Pannonia, modern-day Hungary, and into a land left exhausted and depopulated by decades of war between the Ostrogoths and the Byzantine Empire. The Byzantines, the Eastern Romans, had fought tooth and nail to reclaim Italy for the empire, and they had succeeded, but only just. They were left holding a few key cities and a lot of ravaged countryside. They simply didn't have the manpower or the money to hold it all. So when the Lombards appeared, it was less a dramatic pitched battle for the fate of Italy and more a relentless, piecemeal takeover of a territory too weak to resist. This is a key historical fact. The Lombard invasion of 568 AD wasn't a clean conquest, but a messy, opportunistic occupation that shattered the dream of a restored Roman Italy. Now, as you look around, you try to make sense of the new rulers. The men are intimidating. They call themselves Langobards, and it doesn't take much linguistic skill to figure out why. Their beards are long, often braided or forked, a sign of a free man's status. But it's the hair that's truly distinct. They have a bizarre style, shaving the back of their necks and heads high up, leaving a long fringe combed forward from the crown to hang down over their faces, sometimes parted in the middle. It's a look that's 1 part warrior, 2 parts I cut my own bangs in a dark tent. Our main source, Paul the Deacon, writing a couple of centuries later, suggests this was all about looking terrifying in battle, and you can see his point. It's hard to look a man in the eye when you're trying to figure out the physics of his haircut. You see them striding through the marketplace, their long-bladed scramasax knives at their belts, clad in loose linen tunics and leather leggings. They speak a harsh, guttural tongue that sounds nothing like the soft, flowing, vulgar Latin spoken by the local Roman Italians who are trying to sell them pottery and produce. There's a nervous energy to these interactions. The Lombards are the masters, but they are few. The Romans are the subjects, but they are many. Historians still argue whether the Lombard arrival was a full-scale migration, entire families with their wagons, livestock, and household gods, or if it was primarily a military elite that imposed itself on the existing population. Looking at the faces in the crowd, you see evidence for both. You see Lombard women with their children, their clothing fastened with ornate brooches, but you see far, far more warriors, their hands never far from their weapons. There is no central unifying law, not yet. Power here is personal and local. It belongs to the duke, the dux, the leader of a warband, or fara, who controls the nearest fortified town. These dukes rule their territories almost as independent kings, and they give their loyalty to the so-called king of the Lombards in Pavia only when it suits them. This is a kingdom built on a handshake agreement between powerful men who would just as soon slit each other's throats as share a horn of ale. It's a delicate, violent, and utterly unstable political ecosystem, Justice is a matter of custom, not code. If someone wrongs you, you don't file a lawsuit. You gather your kinsmen and start a feud that could last for generations. Everything is in flux. A new world is being born from the ashes of the old, and the air is electric with both possibility and peril. It is into this chaotic, misty, and brutal landscape that a young woman is about to arrive. A woman whose property and political savvy will become the unlikely glue that holds this fragile kingdom together. Into this swirl of feuds and fragile allegiances, a name begins to be spoken. First in the smoky halls of the dukes, then in the markets among the merchants, carried on the lips of travelers and priests. The name is Theodolinda. She is a princess, the daughter of Duke Garibald of Bavaria, a realm just north of the Alps, and she is coming here. You try to picture her, this foreign woman who is to become the Lombard queen. Is she beautiful? Is she clever? Is she cruel? No one knows, and in truth, no one really cares. These are not the primary metrics by which a princess is judged. The questions being asked in hushed, serious tones are different. What does she bring with her? What alliances are sealed by her arrival? How much power travels in her baggage train? She is, first and foremost, a political solution to a very large problem. That problem is the Franks. Over in Gaul, the Merovingian dynasty has forged a powerful, expansionist kingdom, and they view the new Lombard masters of Italy with a mixture of contempt and ambition. The Franks see themselves as the rightful inheritors of Rome in the west, and the Lombards are, in their eyes, little more than uncouth squatters on valuable property. Raids across the Alps are common, and the threat of a full-scale invasion is constant. The Lombards, for all their ferocity, are hopelessly outnumbered and internally divided. They need allies. This is where Bavaria comes in. The Bavarians are caught in a precarious position, squeezed between the mighty Franks to their west and the unpredictable Lombards to their south. An alliance is a matter of survival for them too. And so, a deal is struck, the oldest deal in the diplomatic playbook, a marriage. Theodolinda is the ink that signs the treaty. Her life is the collateral. When you think about it in modern terms, it's brutally transactional. Her dating profile, if such a thing existed, might read, well-connected Bavarian noblewoman, comes with significant landholdings and a contingent of loyal warriors, seeking ambitious Lombard king to form a defensive anti-Frankish bloc. Must enjoy feasting and strategic political maneuvering. No smokers. Historians still argue whether Theodolinda, likely still in her teens, was a terrified pawn in this great game or a savvy, willing participant who understood the power she was being handed. As you stand in the courtyard of the royal palace in Pavia, you have to imagine she was a complex mixture of both. How could she not be afraid leaving her home forever for a violent foreign court? And yet, how could she not feel a thrill at the prospect of the influence she was about to wield? What elevates her from a mere political bride to a figure of historical consequence is what she represents. Not just an alliance, but portable personal power in the form of her dowry. When you hear the word dowry, you might picture chests of gold coins, fine jewelry, and embroidered linens. And yes, she certainly had all of those things. But in the Germanic world of the 6th century, it was so much more. It was land, or rather the rights to income from vast tracts of land. It was a retinue of her own loyal Bavarian guards, advisors, and servants who were bound to her, not to her future husband. It was political legitimacy, a connection to the ancient and respected Leithings, a dynasty that carried more weight than the relatively new Lombard royal line. It's not like you can just rent a U-Haul and book a storage unit for this kind of wealth. It's a living, breathing extension of her authority. This is a world where wealth is power. A king can only command loyalty as long as he can reward his followers with gifts, with land, with plunder. Theodolinda is arriving as a massive infusion of capital right into the heart of the kingdom. But here is the crucial part. It belongs to her. And this brings us to a fascinating and quirky feature of Germanic law that will become central to our story. The Morgengabe, or the morning gift. Custom dictated that on the morning after the wedding was consummated, the husband would present his new wife with a substantial gift, typically 1/4 to 1/3 of his own lands and property. This became hers, absolutely and unequivocally. So she arrives with a dowry from her father, and she is about to receive a massive fortune from her new husband. This combined wealth will make her one of the single largest stakeholders in the entire Lombard kingdom. No pressure, Theodolinda. Only the political and economic stability of two realms rests on you making a good impression and surviving your wedding night. The dust of her approaching caravan can almost be imagined on the horizon. The waiting is a kind of tension you can taste in the air, thick as the smoke in the king's great hall. The Lombard dukes, those proud, quarrelsome men with their long beards and longer memories for insults, are doing the math. They are calculating what this infusion of Bavarian wealth means for the king, and by extension what it means for them. A king who is suddenly independently wealthy is a king who needs his dukes less. He can afford to hire his own mercenaries, to build his own fortifications, to be generous to new friends, and ruthless to old rivals. Theodolinda isn't just a bride. She's a walking, talking shift in the balance of power, and her dowry is the weight that will tip the scales. To understand why, you have to erase your modern ideas of marriage and property. For the Roman Italians living under Lombard rule, the concept of a dowry, or dus, was familiar, but it was a different beast. Under Roman law, the dus was property given by the bride's father to the husband to help sustain the costs of the new household. While it was meant for the wife's benefit, it was administered entirely by her husband. She had little to no direct control over it. But for the Germanic peoples, the Lombards and Bavarians included, the system was radically different, and it is this difference that arms Theodolinda. Think of it less as a wedding gift and more as a medieval prenup combined with a controlling stake in the family business. Her power will come from a trinity of wealth. First, there is the dowry itself, sometimes called the Vaterfio, the father fee, the immense collection of treasures, rights, and lands she brings from Bavaria. This is a clear political statement from her father, a measure of his own power and his commitment to the alliance. Second, and we've touched on this, is the Morgengabe, the morning gift she will receive from her new husband, King Rothari. This isn't a romantic token. It is a legally binding transfer of a significant portion of his own wealth directly into her name. It proves his satisfaction with the marriage and her status and solidifies her position within the kingdom. Combined, these two funds make her fabulously wealthy. And this is the mainstream historical fact that underpins our entire story. Germanic law codes, for all their harshness, regularly granted elite women significant, personal control over large amounts of property, giving them a degree of economic independence and political leverage that was highly unusual in the ancient world. But with this power comes a profound and fascinating legal paradox. Scholars debate the extent to which this impressive portfolio of property rights translated into true, personal autonomy. While Theodolinda may own vast estates, she is still subject to the mundium, a form of legal guardianship held by a man. Before her marriage, her guardian is her father. After the wedding, that guardianship transfers to her husband. If he dies, it passes to her son or another male relative. This means that while she owns the property, she may not be able to sell it, lease it, or otherwise dispose of it without the formal consent of her male guardian. So you can own a third of the kingdom, but you might still need your husband's signature to finalize a contract. It's complicated, a strange mix of immense power and legal constraint. This treasure isn't an abstract figure in a bank account. It's not like she could check her portfolio on an app. Managing this wealth is a full-time job. It means overseeing dozens of agricultural estates, ensuring crop yields, collecting rents from tenants who likely pay in chickens, grain, and labor. It means paying her personal retinue of warriors and servants, resolving disputes, and defending her property lines from predatory neighbors, which includes some of the very dukes eyeing her arrival with such suspicion. Her dowry isn't a treasure chest to be locked away. It is a living, working enterprise, a strategic weapon she can use to dispense patronage, cultivate loyalty, and pursue her own agenda, separate from, though hopefully aligned with, her husband's. Now you can feel the abstract discussion fading. The waiting is nearly over. The theoretical power is about to become a physical reality, rolling down from the Alpine passes in a long, slow caravan of wagons, guards, and livestock. The theoretical is over. You are on the move. The air in the Bavarian valley is crisp and cold as the caravan assembles. A vast, snaking organism of wood, leather, iron, and flesh. This is Theodolinda's dowry in motion. You see the heavy, iron-bound chests of silver and gold, each requiring 4 stout men to lift, being lashed into ox-drawn wagons. You see wagons filled with bolts of fine wool and linen, with weapons and armor, with Frankish glass and Baltic amber. But you also see herds of cattle and sheep, the living, breathing part of her wealth, lowing and bleating in protest. Most importantly, you see the hard-faced Bavarian warriors, her personal retinue, their spears held upright, their eyes constantly scanning the trees. This isn't a bridal procession, it's a small army, a mobile treasury, and a pioneer settlement all in one. The first part of the journey is the hardest. You trudge upwards into the stony teeth of the Alps. Your travel options are foot, horse, or a spine-juddering wagon. There are no 5-star inns, no scenic rest stops, and the dinner special each night is salted meat and hard bread if you're lucky. The path, likely the ancient route through the Brenner Pass, is a treacherous ribbon of mud and rock. One misplaced step by an ox could send a wagon and a chunk of the Queen's dowry crashing into the ravine below. The air grows thin and pine-scented. The world becomes a starkly beautiful but unforgiving landscape of gray rock, dark green forest, and white snow on the peaks above. For weeks, this is your reality. The caravan is an isolated, self-contained world, a sliver of Bavaria inching its way towards Italy. Then you begin the descent. The change is gradual then sudden. The air softens and grows heavier. The pines give way to deciduous trees. And then you see it for the first time, an olive grove, its leaves a dusty silver green under a warmer sun. You have crossed a threshold into a different world. You are in Italy. The land is gentler, but it is also wounded. You pass farms that lie fallow, their stone walls collapsing. You see the ruins of grand villas, their mosaic floors open to the sky. And you travel on the remnants of Roman genius, the roads. The great stone slabs are often cracked and uneven, a testament to a bygone age of engineering and centralized government. The Romans built these roads to last, but even they probably didn't account for a century of near constant warfare and a complete collapse of the public works budget. As you get deeper into Lombard territory, the cultural friction becomes palpable. The caravan stops near a small village to trade for fresh supplies. Your Bavarian guards, with their strange forward-combed hair, try to communicate with the local Roman Italians. It's a mess of sign language and pidgin phrases. The locals speak a soft, slurring Latin. The Bavarians, a harsh Germanic tongue. The cultural misunderstanding extends to the most basic things. Your people want beer or mead. The villagers offer only thin, sour wine. You are used to a diet heavy in meat, butter, and cheese. They live on bread, olive oil, and vegetables, a cuisine that seems flimsy and unsatisfying. It's the 6th century equivalent of demanding a cheeseburger in a fine Parisian bistro. Both sides are left feeling confused and vaguely insulted. As night falls, a new problem arises. Where do you sleep? Archaeologists and historians debate how much of the old Roman road infrastructure was still functioning. Does the caravan find a fortified mansio, an old imperial post house, still in operation, where you can find shelter and a hot meal? Or more likely, do you simply find the sturdiest-looking ruin, pull the wagons into a defensive circle inside its crumbling walls, and post double the guards? As you huddle by the fire, listening to the strange night sounds of this new country, you realize you are camping in the graveyard of an empire. Theodolinda is here to be queen of a new kingdom, but that kingdom is being built with the rubble of the old one. Soon, the journey will end. The capital, Pavia, is only a few days ahead, and there, a king is waiting. The fields give way to fortified walls of stone and earth. You have arrived at Pavia, the Lombard capital, but if you were expecting a city of gleaming marble and classical grace like Ravenna or Rome, you will be disappointed. Pavia is a fortress. It is a military headquarters that happens to have a city attached. Its Roman name was Ticinum, and the old Roman street grid is still there, but the vibe is overwhelmingly martial. You see more barracks and stables than libraries and bathhouses. Tall wooden halls, their timbers darkened by smoke, stand defiantly next to older, repurposed Roman administrative buildings. This is a city built for holding power, not for debating philosophy. As your caravan passes through the main gate, the Lombard nobility is there to greet you. The dukes. You see them in a line, their fine cloaks fastened with ornate golden brooches, their expressions a carefully curated mask of formal welcome. But their eyes are busy. They are assessing every wagon, every warrior, every chest in your train, and they are watching their king. The welcome isn't exactly a red carpet affair. It's more of a, "We're glad you and your considerable assets have arrived safely. Now let's see how this changes things" kind of vibe. Then you see him, King Rothari. He steps forward from the delegation. He is not a towering giant, but he carries himself with the coiled energy of a man who has spent his life fighting, both on the battlefield and in the council chamber. His beard is long, as is the custom, and his hair is likely styled in that same strange, intimidating Lombard fashion you've grown used to. He is dressed not in silks and ermine, but in fine wool and leather, a magnificent pattern-welded sword hanging from an ornate belt at his hip. He is a king, yes, but he is a warrior first. He has to be. His entire reign has been a desperate struggle to unify the collection of powerful, semi-independent duchies that constitutes his kingdom. These men lined up beside him are his greatest strength and his most persistent problem. To combat this, Rothari made a very clever, very ambitious move. He was the first Lombard king to add the name Flavius to his own. This was no mere whim. The name Flavius was associated with the great Roman emperors from Vespasian to Constantine the Great and beyond. By taking it, Rothari was making a monumental statement. He was telling the dukes and the world that he was not just a tribal chieftain, a first among equals. He was claiming the mantle of imperial authority, a higher and more absolute form of power. Adding Flavius to your name is the 6th century equivalent of putting founder and CEO in your social media bio. It's an announcement of ambition, whether you have the power to back it up or not. Historians debate whether this, along with his other centralizing moves, was part of a visionary long-term strategy to build a truly unified state, or simply a series of desperate short-term improvisations to keep the unruly dukes from tearing the kingdom apart. This flair for the dramatic gesture seems to have been part of his character. The chronicler Paul the Deacon tells a wonderful, if slightly unbelievable, story about him. Seeking to establish the southern borders of his kingdom, Rothari supposedly rode in disguise with a small band of warriors all the way to the southernmost tip of Italy. Reaching the Strait of Messina, he spurred his horse into the water, struck a column standing at the water's edge with his spear, and declared, "Thus far shall the boundaries of the Lombards extend." It's a grand, performative act, a bit dramatic maybe. You can just imagine him riding for weeks, touching the pillar and shouting "mine," while his exhausted guards just want to know when they can go home. But it shows a man who understood that in a world with no written constitution, power had to be performed, it had to be symbolized. This is the man Theodelinda now faces. He nods, a formal greeting. The transaction is nearly complete. They are to be partners in the brutal, complicated business of kingdom building. The day of the wedding arrives, and it feels less like a celebration of love and more like the signing of a major international treaty. There is no quiet, solemn ceremony in a church. This is a public and profoundly legal event, conducted in the open for all the key stakeholders, the dukes, to witness. You watch as Theodelinda, dressed in the finest textiles her dowry could provide, is formally presented to Rothari by the highest-ranking Bavarian noble in her retinue. This is the handover, a symbolic and literal transfer of guardianship. Gifts are exchanged, not small personal trinkets but significant public displays of wealth. Rothari might present her representative with a prize sword or a herd of fine horses. Her family, in turn, formally bestows the dowry. Words are spoken, loud and clear for all to hear. Legal historians still debate the precise sequence and legal weight of the different parts of a Germanic wedding. Was it this public declaration, the exchange of gifts, or the later consummation that truly sealed the deal? The truth is, all of it mattered. It was a process, a series of public acts that left no one in any doubt about the new reality. The vows exchanged are less in sickness and in health, and more in our binding alliance against the Franks and for the mutual preservation of our dynasties. It is a contract, and everyone here is a witness. With the formalities concluded, the real business begins at the feast. You file into the king's great hall, a vast, smoky chamber lit by a central fire pit and hundreds of torches. The noise is immediate and overwhelming. The roar of conversation, the clatter of knives on wooden plates, the boasting of warriors. The wedding feast is the ultimate 6th century networking event. Deals are made in murmured conversations, old feuds are temporarily papered over with shared horns of ale, and the quality of the king's roasted boar is a direct indicator of his political stability. You see Rothari moving through the hall, a word with a surly duke from Spoleto, a shared joke with a powerful warrior from Friuli, and you see him conferring with Theodelinda's Bavarian advisors, the architects of this alliance, nodding seriously as translators murmur between them. As the evening wears on, a man with a small harp-like lyre is led to the center of the hall. A hush falls. He is the scop, the court poet. He is not just the entertainment, he is the memory and the mouthpiece of the tribe. The entertainment isn't a DJ playing your favorite dance tunes. It's a guy with a harp about to sing a 45-minute epic poem he just composed about how incredibly wise and powerful your new king is. You are expected to listen intently and applaud with gusto. He begins to sing, his voice rising and falling in a hypnotic chant. The song tells of Rothari's great deeds, his ride to the sea, his victories in battle. Then it weaves in Theodelinda's lineage, praising her noble Bavarian ancestors, the ancient Leithings. The poem is a masterful piece of political propaganda, forging a shared history for this new union, presenting it not as a desperate political maneuver, but as a divinely ordained destiny. He sings of the strength that will flow from this joining of peoples, a bastion against the grasping ambition of the Franks. By the time he finishes, the assembled nobles are cheering, their cups held high. For tonight at least they are united. The pact is sealed in oaths, in wine and in song. Theodelinda is now the Lombard queen. Across the Alps their enemies are watching, and the real work of ruling has just begun. The echoes of the wedding feast fade, replaced by the daily grinding business of the kingdom. Now, as queen, you begin to see the true complexity of the world you have entered. You sit beside Rothari as he holds court in the great hall, and you start to notice the invisible lines, the deep cultural fractures that run through Lombard society. It becomes clear that there are two different worlds operating here, side by side, governed by two completely different ideas of what law and justice even mean. On one side, you have the Roman Italians. When a dispute arises among them, a disagreement over a property line, a merchant's broken contract, they think in terms of paper. They bring forward deeds, meticulously written documents with witness signatures and wax seals. They refer to the great codified traditions of Roman law, like the Theodosian Code. For them, law is a written, abstract, and impersonal system. It exists in books, separate from any one person. On the other side, you have the Lombards. Their law is not found in books. It is etched into memory and custom. It is a deeply personal and oral tradition. A Lombard warrior proves his ownership of a piece of land not with a deed, but by stating that his father held it before him, and by having a dozen of his kinsmen, his oath helpers, stand with him and swear that his claim is true. Their legal code is stored in the mind of the tribe's designated law speaker, an elder who can recite the traditions from memory at the great assembly of warriors, the Thing. It's a system that works more or less until the elder's memory gets fuzzy, or he happens to be the claimant's uncle. This leads to an official policy that historians call the personality of the law. This is the central historical fact of the era. In the Lombard kingdom, you were judged by the law of your people. A Roman was subject to Roman law, a Lombard to Lombard law. It's like a website having completely different terms of service for every single user. It's confusing, contradictory, and a recipe for constant arguments. Historians and legal scholars still debate how this dual system actually functioned in everyday life, especially in the inevitable cases that crossed the ethnic divide. You see this clash play out right in front of you. A Roman farmer, his face etched with worry, comes before the king. He holds up a papyrus deed claiming a Lombard warrior has seized his vineyard. The warrior is summoned. He is a mountain of a man, his hand resting on the hilt of his sword. He doesn't deny taking the land. He simply states that his duke granted it to him as a reward for his service in the last campaign against the Franks. He has no deed. He has his duke's word and the loyalty of his warband. It's a legal showdown, where one party brings a 200-page contract and the other brings a very large axe. The king's job is to figure out which is more legally binding. What happens in a case like that? Which law applies? If the Lombard is forced to return the land, the king risks alienating a powerful warrior and his duke. If the Roman's deed is ignored, it sends a message to the entire Roman Italian population that they have no rights, that their property can be taken at will. This could lead to unrest, even open revolt. As you watch Rothari try to navigate this impossible dilemma, you realize the profound instability at the heart of his kingdom. A state with two sets of rules is not a unified state at all. It is a temporary truce waiting to be broken. For a queen who has staked her entire future on the success of this kingdom, that is a terrifying realization. For a little over a year, it seems to be working. The marriage, this cold-blooded political merger, is yielding results. You see Rothari, his authority bolstered by the steady flow of wealth from Theodelinda's estates, speaking with a new confidence to the dukes. He can afford to be more generous with his gifts and therefore more demanding in his calls for loyalty. Theodelinda, for her part, is proving to be a shrewd political partner. She is the kingdom's diplomatic link to the world beyond the Alps, and her Bavarian retinue provides a core of unquestioning loyalty right at the heart of the court. They're just starting to get the hang of this whole running a kingdom thing. They've got a system, they're making progress. And you know what that means in a story like this. Something terrible is about to happen. It happens on a September day in the capital of Pavia. The year is 590. King Rothari is taken ill. It is not a slow decline, not a lingering fever that gives the court time to prepare. It is a sudden, violent sickness. One day he is presiding over his council, and the next he is writhing in his bed. His physicians, a helpless posse of herbalists and prayer chanters, looking on in confusion. Of course, in the 6th century, the official diagnosis could be anything from a bad humor to divine displeasure, and the cause of death report isn't going to be very specific. But as the king's life ebbs away with shocking speed, a single terrifying word begins to be whispered in the corridors of the palace. Poison. Our source, Paul the Deacon, writing later but with access to earlier accounts, states plainly that Rothari died from poison. This was not the Lombard way. If a Lombard wanted you dead, he'd challenge you to a duel or ambush you with a dozen of his closest friends. An axe to the skull was their preferred method of political debate. Poison was seen as sneaky, dishonorable, a Roman or Byzantine method. It was the tool of the plotter in the shadows, not the warrior in the field. The very suspicion introduces a foreign serpentine element of fear into the court. It means there is a traitor, a hidden enemy, right here in their midst. And who could it be? Historians still debate who, if anyone, was behind Rothari's potential poisoning. The list of suspects is long. Could it have been one of the powerful, semi-independent dukes from the south, like the ruler of Spoleto or Benevento, who chafed under Rothari's attempts to centralize power? Could it have been an agent of the Byzantine exarch in Ravenna, a surgical strike to decapitate the Lombard leadership and throw the kingdom into chaos? Or perhaps it was the Franks, seeking to shatter the Lombard-Bavarian alliance that had so effectively checked their ambitions. We will likely never know. What we do know is this. On September 5th, 590, King Rothari is dead. The news falls like an executioner's axe on the court. There is no adult son, no designated successor. The fragile unity Rothari and Theodelinda had been building for the past year shatters in an instant. The oaths of loyalty sworn to Rothari are now void. Every duke is once again a king in his own territory. The kingdom is no longer a kingdom. It is a power vacuum. And at the very center of that vacuum sits Theodelinda. 1 minute you're the queen, a respected partner in power and a key player in international politics. The next, your husband is dead, and you've suddenly become the wealthiest, most vulnerable single woman in the entire kingdom. Her dowry, her greatest asset, has just become the ultimate prize for whoever is bold enough to seize it, and her with it. The vultures are circling. In the days following Rothari's death, Pavia is a tinderbox. The dukes arrive from their territories, their armed retinues swelling the city's population and its tension. They gather in the Great Hall, ostensibly to mourn their king, but in reality, to decide what comes next. And they have a very big problem. Every single one of them believes he would make a fine king, but they also know that the moment one of them makes a serious play for the throne, the others will unite to tear him down. It's a political Mexican standoff, where individual ambition is checked by the certainty of mutual destruction. A civil war would be ruinous, leaving the kingdom weak and ripe for the picking by the ever-watchful Franks or Byzantines. They are trapped between greed and fear. They need a king, but they cannot agree on one from among their own ranks. And as they argue and posture, a new radical idea begins to form, likely in the mind of a particularly clever and pragmatic duke. They stop looking at each other as candidates and rivals, and they start looking towards the queen's chambers. They start looking at Theodelinda not as a prize to be won, but as the solution to their problem. The logic, when you break it down, is brutally practical. First, she provides legitimacy and continuity. Any man she marries will instantly be linked to the reign of the now popular King Rothari. Second, her own lineage is impeccable. As a descendant of the semi-legendary Leithing clan, her blood was considered bluer than that of any of the Lombard warlords who were currently carving out duchies for themselves. Her ancestry carried a mystical weight that none of them could claim. Third, she is the linchpin of the critical Bavarian alliance. To discard her would be to invite trouble from across the Alps. And finally, and most importantly, she has the money. Her vast personal wealth, her dowry and Morgengabe, is essential for funding the kingdom. A king without her resources would be a poor king indeed. And so they arrive at an unprecedented, extraordinary decision. The historical record is clear on this. The Lombard dukes, in a moment of collective desperation and genius, formally grant Queen Theodelinda the power to choose the next king. She will make her selection, and whomever she chooses, she will marry. And by that act of marriage, she will confer the crown upon him, and they will all pledge him their loyalty. So Theodelinda gets to run the 6th century version of the Bachelor Lombard Kingdom edition. The grand prize isn't a rose. It's a crown and a lifetime of trying to avoid a repeat of what just happened to her first husband. Historians debate whether this decision was a moment of inspired, desperate pragmatism born on the floor of the council, or if it was carefully orchestrated behind the scenes by a faction of dukes who already had a candidate in mind and simply needed a way to legitimize him. Was Theodelinda truly given a free choice, or was she being skillfully guided towards a pre-approved outcome? You stand in the shadows of the court and watch as a delegation of the most powerful men in the kingdom approach her, their heads bowed. They are not here to threaten or to seize. They are here to ask. They lay the fate of the kingdom at her feet. In that single moment, the power dynamic of the entire nation shifts, rotating on the axis of this one woman. This wasn't a sudden outbreak of 6th century feminism. The dukes didn't collectively decide to lean in. They simply finally understood that the quiet woman in the grieving chamber was the only one holding all the cards. The power is now hers, but it is a terrifying kind of power, where one wrong move could plunge the kingdom into civil war and lead to her own demise. You can imagine her in her chambers, the candlelight flickering across a mental map of the kingdom. Who to choose? A powerful southern duke from Spoleto? He would bring military might, but his ambition might be too great, and the other dukes would see him as a rival who had simply won the game. A lesser noble from a minor territory. He would be more pliable, more grateful, but would he command the respect of the warriors? Would the other dukes obey a man they considered their inferior? Her checklist for new husband king probably didn't include good sense of humor or enjoys long walks on the beach. It was more like, won't try to murder me for my dowry, can win a battle, and is broadly acceptable to a council of heavily armed and deeply suspicious warlords. After what must have been days of intense calculation, she makes her choice. A messenger is dispatched from Pavia, riding west. The court holds its breath. The summons goes to Turin, to its duke, a man named Agilulf. When he arrives in the capital, you see a man different from the polished and ambitious Rothari. Agilulf is a soldier. He is described by Paul the Deacon as strenuous in war and of good character. He carries himself with a warrior's economy of motion. He is respected, competent, and strategically located. But he is not a political superstar. He is in many ways the perfect compromise candidate. Agilulf is the guy everyone can agree on because nobody passionately hates him yet. He's the vanilla ice cream of 6th century Lombard politics, and that is precisely why he is a brilliant choice. The political calculation is flawless. Firstly, and most critically, Agilulf is a kinsman of the late King Rothari. This single fact provides an invaluable thread of continuity. This isn't a hostile takeover by a rival dynasty. It can be framed as keeping the kingship within the family. Secondly, as Duke of Turin, he is powerful enough to have military credibility, but not so powerful that he threatens the great ducal blocks of the northeast or the south. He doesn't fundamentally upset the existing balance of power. Historians debate how much of this was Theodelinda's own independent calculation versus the subtle influence of a pro-Agilulf faction at court who saw him as their ideal candidate and skillfully maneuvered her towards this choice. Either way, the decision was a masterstroke of political pragmatism. Of course, history rarely remembers cold calculation. It prefers romance. And so Paul the Deacon provides us with a wonderful, almost certainly fictionalized account of how the choice was revealed. In his telling, Theodelinda has Agilulf brought before her privately. After speaking with him for a time, she calls for a goblet of wine. She drinks first, then offers it to him. As was the custom, he takes the cup and respectfully kisses her hand. Looking at him, she says, "He who has the right to kiss my hand has the right to kiss my lips." She then embraces him, revealing her choice not with a proclamation but with a kiss. It's a fantastic story, very dramatic. It's also probably completely made up to make a hard-nosed political decision look like a fairy tale. 6th century public relations was all about good storytelling. The choice is made, the crisis is averted. A new king stands beside the queen. Their wedding is a swift, solemn, and deeply practical affair. There is no time for the elaborate feasting and political theater that marked Theodelinda's first marriage. A kingdom is dangling on the precipice, and they are the ones tasked with pulling it back. There's no honeymoon. The wedding reception probably blended seamlessly into a war council meeting, with the first item on the agenda being, which of our powerful dukes is most likely to rebel this week? Agilulf has the title of king, but his throne is balanced on a knife's edge. He needs to transform the grudging acceptance of the dukes into actual, tangible loyalty, and he needs to do it fast. This is the moment Theodelinda's dowry transforms from a personal fortune into the national treasury. It becomes the anchor that will hold the ship of state steady in the storm. The most urgent problem is that loyalty, in the 6th century Lombard kingdom, is a commodity that must be purchased again and again. Agilulf, as the mere Duke of Turin, was a man of relatively modest means. But as the husband of Theodelinda, he suddenly has the resources to be a magnificent king. This is governance by gold arm ring. You're not winning hearts and minds with inspiring rhetoric. You're winning the allegiance of swords and spears with tangible wealth, which is a much more effective strategy in the short term. You now witness a new kind of performance in the Great Hall at Pavia. Agilulf and Theodelinda sit enthroned together. A line of warriors, men who had been wavering in their allegiance, are called forward. Agilulf makes the speech, his voice booming with authority, but when the rewards are given out, a finely crafted sword with a gilded hilt, a heavy gold arm ring, a pouch of silver coins, everyone in the room knows where the money is coming from. They are acting out one of the most essential roles of a Germanic king, that of the Bürgergiver, the ring giver, a concept you find woven through all their epic poetry. A generous king is a good king. A stingy king is a weak king who will soon be abandoned. With Theodelinda's wealth, Agilulf can be the greatest ring giver of them all. But what is the legal nature of this new partnership? Historians debate the precise legal nature of Theodelinda's control over her property after her second marriage. Did her new husband's legal guardianship, his mundium, give him total administrative control over her vast fortune, or, as seems more likely given her unique position, did she retain a significant degree of independent authority, acting as a co-ruler in all financial matters? It's the 6th century equivalent of a high-stakes argument over whether to get a joint bank account or keep your finances separate. Except in this case, separate finances means the queen might have her own treasury and the ability to fund her own loyalists. This financial power is quickly translated into military might. The early years of Agilulf's reign were not peaceful. As expected, several powerful dukes saw the succession as an opportunity to break away and establish their own independent rule. They saw Agilulf as a compromise candidate, a weakling. They were wrong. Because when they rebelled, Agilulf was able to do something a new king in his position normally couldn't. He immediately raised, equipped, and, most importantly, paid a large, loyal army to march against them. Theodelinda's dowry didn't just buy loyalty in the court. It funded the military campaigns that forged a unified kingdom out of a rebellious confederacy. The dowry, once a marriage proposal, has now become the crown's anchor, holding it firm against the tides of rebellion. The throne is no longer shaky, it is secure. A king who stays in his capital is only king of his capital. Agilulf and Theodelinda understand this. Securing the throne in Pavia with gifts and oaths is one thing. Making that power real in the distant, fiercely independent duchies of Friuli or Tuscany is another matter entirely. So, the court packs up. They embark on a royal progress, a grand tour of their own kingdom. This is the 6th century version of a major political tour. It involves a massive caravan of soldiers, administrators, servants, and nobles. No motorcades, just horses and wagons. And it completely disrupts local life as everyone is expected to stop what they are redoing and pretend to be overjoyed to see their new rulers. You are now part of this moving capital, a city on the march. As you approach the seat of a powerful duke, you see the strategy unfold. It is a masterful combination of the carrot and the stick. The carrot comes first. The royal couple arrives with wagons of gifts, all funded by Theodelinda's seemingly bottomless resources. The local duke is honored in a public ceremony. A great feast is held. Here, Theodelinda is as crucial as her husband. While Agilulf meets with the Lombard warriors, sharing war stories and drinking ale, Theodelinda engages in a different kind of diplomacy. She, a devout Chalcedonian Christian, meets with the local Roman bishop, with the wealthy Roman landowners, and with the duke's own wife. She builds bridges with the majority population that the Aryan Lombard duke often struggles to control. Then there is the stick. It is unspoken, but it is impossible to miss. The royal army that accompanies them is large, well-equipped, and disciplined. Its soldiers are loyal to the king, not the local duke, because the king pays them. It is a visible reminder of the fate of those dukes who had rebelled and been crushed. Their entire diplomatic approach can be summarized as, "Here is a beautiful golden bracelet for your loyalty. Please also take a moment to notice the 500 heavily armed men standing behind me who are loyal only to me. Have a wonderful day." There's another more subtle tool of power at play here, the obligation of hospitality. This is the quirky and fascinating reality of the itinerant court. When the king arrives, the host duke is expected to provide food, drink, and lodging for the entire royal entourage, which could number in the hundreds. It's a great honor, but it is also financially crippling. Having the king and his 300 closest friends and their horses stay for a month is the medieval equivalent of your entire extended family descending on your house for the holidays and eating you out of house and home. Except you can't complain or ask when they're leaving, because your guest commands an army and can have you executed for treason. This enforced hospitality was a way for the king to enjoy the best of the land, while subtly diminishing the resources of his most powerful subjects. This whole process raises a question that historians still debate. How much were these progresses genuine attempts at unified administration and the dispensing of royal justice, versus how much were they essentially glorified shakedowns? Were they there to govern? Or was this a tour of intimidation designed to extract wealth in the form of gifts and remind the dukes of their place? The answer is likely a bit of both. By the time Agilulf and Theodelinda's tour is complete, The entire political landscape has changed. They return to Pavia not just as the couple who inherited the throne, but as the undisputed rulers of a kingdom they have personally visited, pacified, and bound to their will. The personal allegiances have been secured. The question now is how to make that power last. The royal tour was a success, but Agilulf and Theodelinda are smart enough to know that loyalty purchased with a feast and a gold bracelet can be fleeting. Personal charisma and a show of force can pacify a kingdom, but they can't govern it in the long term. What happens when the king is old or sick or facing a new threat? They need to build a system of loyalty that is more permanent, something that will outlast a single reign. They need to bind the warrior aristocracy to the crown with obligations that are durable and understood by all. In a world with very little circulating coinage, where wealth is not measured in a bank account, but in fields of grain and herds of cattle, the ultimate currency is land. And Theodelinda, thanks to her dowry and Morgengabe, is the single largest landholder in the kingdom besides the crown itself. So they begin a systematic project, the strategic granting of land from her vast estates to loyal dukes, warriors, and administrators. This process will form the very bedrock of Lombard governance for the next century, and it is a fascinating example of law being created long before law codes are ever written down. You are in the Great Hall as a particularly loyal warrior is brought before the royal couple. He has distinguished himself in the recent campaigns against the rebels. Agilulf announces that for his service he is being granted a specific estate in the countryside, with its farms, forests, and the people who work the land. Then comes the crucial, symbolic moment of investiture. The king doesn't hand him a written deed. Instead, he might hand him a ceremonial spear or a ring, or most vividly, a simple clump of earth dug from the estate itself. So you risk your life for the king, and as a closing gift for the deal, he hands you a lump of dirt. It seems strange to us, but in a pre-literate legal culture, this physical, tangible act was the contract. It was the moment the transfer became legally real. And with that clod of earth comes a whole set of unwritten terms and conditions. By accepting the land, the warrior is implicitly agreeing to a host of obligations. The most important of these is military service. He is now bound to appear for the king's army whenever summoned, and to bring with him a specified number of armed men from his new estate. He also owes the king his counsel and his loyalty. The terms aren't in fine print. They're implied by the fact that the king who gave you the land still has a much bigger army than you do. That tends to clarify the obligations. This system of granting land in exchange for service is the foundation of what we now call feudalism. Of course, asking two medieval historians to agree on a precise definition of feudalism is a surefire way to start an argument. It's a scholarly feud that has lasted longer than most actual medieval feuds. Historians have a famously contentious debate about whether it was a coherent, systematic structure or just a convenient label for a messy collection of local customs. But the core principle is right here in this hall: land for service. Each one of these grants is a legal precedent. It is a single knot in a growing web of reciprocal duties that ties the kingdom together. Theodelinda's dowry is no longer just her personal property. It is being converted piece by piece into the legal and military infrastructure of the Lombard state. They are building a kingdom, one clod of earth at a time. Power built on land grants and personal loyalty is strong, but it's also fundamentally earthly. It can be challenged by a stronger army or a richer rival. To truly secure their dynasty, Theodelinda and Agilulf need something more. They need to elevate their rule from the political to the sacred. They need a story, a symbol, something that connects their reign to the authority of God himself. And so you turn your attention to a single legendary object with which Queen Theodelinda is inextricably linked: the Iron Crown of Lombardy. At first glance, it is a beautiful piece of late antique jewelry, a circlet of gold set with gemstones and enamel. But its fame, its power, and its name come from the simple, unadorned band of metal that runs along its inner surface. That band, according to centuries of powerful legend, is not just any piece of metal. It is iron that was beaten into shape from one of the very nails used in the crucifixion of Christ. The story holds that the nail was discovered by Saint Helena, mother of the Roman Emperor Constantine the Great, during her pilgrimage to the Holy Land. To be crowned with this object was to be physically connected to the central moment of the Christian faith and to the legacy of the first Christian emperor. It is the ultimate power move. It's like having a personal letter of recommendation from God himself. Theodelinda is the pivotal figure in this crown story. While its precise origins are murky, tradition holds that she is the one who established its home and its importance at the basilica she founded in Monza, a town near Milan that she made into a favored royal capital. By centering her court and her religious patronage around this astonishingly powerful relic, she was making a clear statement. Her family's rule was not an accident of history or a product of brute force. It was divinely sanctioned. Now for the quirky and slightly awkward scientific truth. Modern analysis of the crown, conducted in the late 20th century, revealed that the famous iron band is, in fact, about 99% silver. So the iron crown contains no discernible iron. It's a bit like finding out your family's treasured solid gold heirloom is just very well plated. But here's the thing. When a story is that good and that politically useful, nobody is going to let a few inconvenient metallurgical facts get in the way. The mystery only deepens from there. Art historians and archaeologists fiercely debate the crown's true origin and age. Is it a late Roman officer's helmet decoration? A votive crown from a Byzantine church? Could it have been made for an Ostrogothic king like Theodoric the Great, long before the Lombards arrived? Trying to pin down its provenance is a historical rabbit hole. The only certainty is that Theodelinda's patronage made it famous. But in the end, the object's true history is less important than what it did. The Iron Crown was a piece of political genius. It fused the three sources of legitimacy in 6th century Italy into a single object. It was a royal crown asserting Lombard kingship. Its connection to a crucifixion nail asserted divine Christian authority, and its link to the Emperor Constantine asserted a claim to be the rightful heirs of the Roman Empire. By associating her husband and her son with this crown, Theodelinda was wrapping their raw military power in an almost unchallengeable aura of sacred and historical destiny. The crown itself became a kind of law, a physical title deed to the kingdom, issued from the highest possible authority. By linking her dynasty to the Iron Crown, Theodelinda was making a claim to the universal, orthodox authority of the Christian faith. There was just one small problem. The vast majority of the Lombard warriors and nobles, including her husband Agilulf, did not practice that faith. They were Arians, and to the mainstream Chalcedonian Church of Rome and Constantinople that made them heretics. This religious divide was the single greatest source of tension within the kingdom, a deep fault line running between the rulers and the ruled. To understand the stakes, you have to understand the core of the disagreement. Mainstream Chalcedonian Christianity, the faith of Theodelinda and the entire Roman Italian population, held that Jesus Christ was fully divine, co-equal and co-eternal with God the Father. Arianism, which had been adopted by many Germanic tribes a century or two earlier, held that Christ was also divine, but as a created being he was subordinate to the Father. The difference seems infinitesimally subtle to us now, but in the 6th century, it was the kind of theological dispute that people would happily burn cities and start wars over. It was the ultimate read the terms and conditions moment in the history of religion. For the Lombards, being Arian was a key part of their cultural identity. It was what separated them from the Romans they had conquered. Into this chasm steps Theodelinda. As a Chalcedonian, her personal faith aligns her perfectly with the Pope in Rome and with the vast majority of her subjects. This gives her immense potential influence. Historians debate Theodelinda's primary motivation. Was her subsequent pro-Chalcedonian policy driven by genuine, deeply felt personal piety, or was it a brilliantly calculated political strategy to win the support of the Roman Italian elites and build a more stable, unified kingdom? The most likely answer is that it was both. For a medieval queen, piety was politics. Her strategy was not one of forced conversion, which would have been impossible. It was a slow, careful campaign of patronage and diplomacy, and it was complicated. At one point, she and the Lombard court were drawn into the 3-chapter controversy, an almost impossibly obscure theological schism within the Chalcedonian Church in Italy. Trying to understand the details of the three-chapter controversy is famously difficult. It's like trying to follow the plot of a season of a TV show you have never seen, based only on angry comments you're reading on the internet. You just know it's incredibly important to the people involved, but the reasons are a total mystery. The fact that Theodolinda skillfully navigated this internal dispute, for a time even finding herself at odds with the Pope, shows that she was a sophisticated political operator, not just a pious benefactor. Her most significant and lasting move, however, came with the birth of her son and heir, Adaloald. Here she made a decision that would shape the future of the kingdom. The boy was not baptized in Arian, the faith of his father and the Lombard aristocracy. He was baptized a Chalcedonian Catholic, the faith of his mother. This was a monumental act. Having your son and heir baptized into your faith instead of your husband's is a bold, decisive political statement. It was a clear signal that the future of the Lombard monarchy would lie with Rome, not with the fading Arian traditions of the past. By doing this, she was ensuring that the next king would not be seen as a heretic by the majority of the people he was destined to rule. It was a long-term investment in the legitimacy and stability of her family's dynasty. The kingdom is more stable and prosperous than it has been in a generation, but success creates its own set of problems. With peace comes more travel, more trade, and more interaction between the Lombard and Roman populations. A Lombard soldier marries the daughter of a Roman merchant. A Roman landowner leases a field to a Lombard farmer. These everyday transactions, once rare, are now becoming common, and the dual-track legal system, which was already confusing, is now creaking and groaning under the strain of this new complexity. The whole process for resolving a dispute is basically a flowchart with 100 arrows that all point to, "It's complicated," and end with a hearty, "Good luck." How the weaknesses of the unwritten Lombard customary law are becoming glaringly obvious. What happens when two Lombard elders disagree on the memory of an ancient custom regarding inheritance? Who is right? What happens when a case is judged one way in Pavia, but a similar case is judged completely differently by a duke in Spoleto? There is no consistency, no certainty. And this uncertainty is a barrier to progress. You see the impossible situations piling up in the king's court. A Lombard warrior who married a Roman woman dies without a son. His Lombard relatives show up, claiming that by their custom as the nearest male kin they inherit all his property. But his Roman widow produces her marriage contract, which, according to Roman law, guarantees her a significant share. It's the ultimate in-law problem. Your Roman father-in-law's will is a legally binding document, while your Lombard brother-in-law's idea of an inheritance plan is simply showing up with a sharper axe. Who is right? Which law prevails? Or consider a Lombard noble who wants to buy a herd of cattle from a Roman merchant. The Roman, as is his custom, draws up a written contract in Latin. The Lombard scoffs at the piece of papyrus, but gives his solemn oath, his hand on his sword, to seal the deal. When he later fails to pay, he claims the written contract is meaningless scribbling. The merchant claims the oath is just empty words. Without a single unified law, how can trade and commerce possibly flourish? This growing chaos creates an undeniable pressure to do something radical, to write it all down. But this very act is a cultural concession. Writing, especially writing law, is a Roman activity. The Lombards are a people of the spoken word, the oath, the remembered tradition. To codify their law, they must use the Latin language, the language of the conquered. They must hire Roman scribes, men trained in a completely different legal philosophy. The medium will inevitably influence the message, and this leads to a question that legal historians still debate. Was the primary purpose of these new written codes to genuinely dispense clearer justice for everyone, or was it a calculated move to strengthen the king's power? Writing down the law is a great way to make sure everyone is on the same page. It's also a great way for the king to make sure that the page everyone is on is the one that he wrote, centralizing justice under the crown and away from the local dukes. The need is clear. The demands of a growing, complex, multicultural state are overwhelming the unwritten customs of a migrating tribe. The next great act of nation-building cannot be done with a sword or a coin, but with a pen. So if you were tasked with writing down the chaotic, unwritten customs of the Lombards, what would the first chapter be about? Justice? Rights? The power of the king? No. It would be about the price of things, because the single most important legal concept in the Lombard world, the principle that underpins their entire approach to justice, is wergild. The word literally means man price, and it is a system of financial restitution designed to solve the single most destructive problem in their society, the blood feud. The logic is simple. If a man from Clan A kills a man from Clan B is honor-bound to take revenge by killing someone from Clan A, which then requires Clan A to retaliate, and so on, until both families are destroyed. Wergild offers an off-ramp. It provides a specific, legally mandated cash payment that the offender S family can make to the victim S family to settle the matter, restore honor, and, most importantly, prevent a war. This is not a vague suggestion for compensation. It is a breathtakingly specific tariff system, a price list for every conceivable injury and insult. The foundation of the system is the value of a whole person, which varied wildly based on social status. The wergild for a free Lombard warrior, a pillar of the community, was a very large sum. The price for a half-free artisan was less. The price for a Roman citizen, even a wealthy one, was typically set at half the value of his Lombard equivalent. It's a blunt statement of the kingdom's social and ethnic hierarchy. But it's when you get to specific injuries that the system becomes truly, viscerally fascinating. The law codes, which would be written down a few decades after Theodelinda's time, but which recorded these ancient customs, read like a morbid catalog. You can almost imagine a Lombard lawyer pulling out a scroll and saying, "Okay, so you broke his leg, but was it a clean break or a compound fracture where the bone sticks out?" The pricing is very different. Losing an eye would cost you half the victim's total wergild, because you've taken half his ability to be a warrior. A hand is slightly less. A thumb, crucial for gripping a sword, is worth much more than a pinky finger. Knocking out a tooth has its own price, and a front tooth is worth more than a molar. It's a strange lesson in 6th century aesthetics. Your smile, it seems, is legally more valuable than your ability to chew. And the law didn't just protect your body, it protected your honor. This system had incredibly specific fines for insults. Accusing another man of being an arga, a term implying cowardice and unmanliness, was a grave offense that carried a hefty fine. In the Lombard kingdom, you had to watch what you said. Calling someone a nasty name could literally cost you a herd of cattle. It was the world's most expensive swear jar. Of course, anthropologists and legal historians still debate whether the wergild system truly replaced the blood feud, or if it simply existed alongside it as an option. Families, feeling their honor was too gravely wounded for a mere cash payment, might still choose the path of violent revenge. This entire system, so strange to our modern sensibilities, is a clear window into the Lombard soul. It reveals a society that is deeply concerned with social status, that sees justice as a negotiation between kin groups rather than a matter for the state, and that believes above all in finding pragmatic solutions to prevent society from tearing itself apart. This is the legal framework that Theodelinda and Agilulf are working with, a system where every person, and every piece of a person, has its price. The wergild system provides a neat, if brutal, way to settle accounts. It creates a clear financial path to resolving disputes and preventing feuds. But it all hinges on one crucial thing: knowing who is guilty. What happens when a man is accused of theft or murder, and he stands before the king or the duke and swears on his immortal soul that he didn't do it? In a world with no forensic evidence, no detective branch, and no concept of proof beyond a reasonable doubt, how do you solve a case of one man's word against another's? For the Lombards, the answer was simple: you ask God. When human justice reached its limits, they turned to the Judicium Dei, the judgment of God. They believed that God was an active and interested party in the affairs of the world, and would surely intervene to reveal the truth if asked in the proper way. The most direct way of asking was trial by combat. This was not a back-alley brawl. It was a formal, legally sanctioned duel. The accuser and the accused would meet in a designated field, armed with a shield and a sword, and fight. The winner was not simply the better fighter. He was, by definition, the man whom God had favored. Victory in combat was irrefutable proof of innocence. Your legal defense strategy in the 6th century wasn't about finding a clever lawyer. It was about finding a very, very tough cousin who was good with a shield. And in a quirky loophole that heavily favored the wealthy, a powerful man could even hire a champion, a professional warrior, to fight on his behalf. But what if the accused was a woman, a child, or a priest, someone for whom trial by combat was not an option? For these cases, they turned to trial by ordeal, a direct physical test administered to the accused, where the outcome was read as a divine verdict. One of the most common was the ordeal by hot iron. The accused was forced to carry a red-hot bar of iron for a set number of paces. Their burned hand was then bandaged and sealed. 3 days later, it was inspected. If the wound was festering, it was a sign of God's displeasure. They were guilty. If it was healing cleanly, God had performed a miracle. They were innocent. Even more perplexing to our minds was the ordeal by cold water. The accused would be bound, thumb to toe, and thrown into a river or a pond that had been blessed by a priest. Since water was a pure element, it was believed it would reject a sinner. Therefore, if you floated, you were guilty. If you sank, the pure water had accepted you, and you were declared innocent, at which point you were hopefully pulled out before you drowned. It's a real no-win situation for anyone who happens to be a decent swimmer. Now, historians and theologians debate whether the priests and officials overseeing these ordeals were always acting in good faith. Did they genuinely believe God was directing every outcome, or did they sometimes put a thumb on the divine scales? You can need help, but hope the priest overseeing your ordeal by hot iron was in a good mood that day, and maybe didn't leave the bar in the fire for quite so long. These practices seem like institutionalized madness to us, but they were born from a worldview where the barrier between the physical and the divine was porous. Justice was not a human science. It was an appeal to a higher and hopefully clearer authority. Now, it's easy to look at things like trial by ordeal and assume that all these Germanic kingdoms were working from the same legal playbook of brutal, faith-based justice. And while there were many similarities, when it came to the laws of family, property, and inheritance, there could be profound differences. To truly understand what made Theodelinda's position possible, you have to look across the Alps at the Lombards' most powerful rivals, the Franks, and their very different set of rules. The Franks, under their Merovingian kings, were governed by a code known as the Salic law, or Lex Salica. Deep within this code, first written down almost a century before the Lombards even invaded Italy, is a single, fateful clause. It states, quite simply, that a woman cannot inherit what was known as terra salica, or Salic land. Historians debate whether the original intent of this was a grand constitutional principle, or a much more practical rule to ensure that ancestral family land, the kind that warriors were granted in exchange for military service, always remained in the hands of men who could fight to defend it. Whatever its original intent, this clause grew over the centuries into an unshakable principle of French law. The throne could not pass to or through a woman. This single line in an ancient law code is the reason France had no reigning queens like England, S. Elizabeth I, or Spain, S. Isabella. It was the legal justification for the start of the 100 Years' War. It's perhaps the most consequential typo in legal history. Now hold that rigid Frankish model in your mind and think back to Theodelinda. After Rothari's death, if she had been a Frankish queen in Paris instead of a Lombard queen in Pavia, the story would have been very different and much shorter. She would have been, at best, a respected dowager queen. Her property would have been managed by male relatives, and she likely would have been quietly married off to a suitable noble to secure some minor alliance. The idea of the Frankish dukes gathering and granting her the power to choose the next king is utterly unthinkable. It would have made their heads explode. The Lombard legal framework, for all its own patriarchal structures like the mundium, clearly had a flexibility that the Salic code lacked. The Lombard system, with its emphasis on the dowry and especially the Morgengabe, allowed an elite woman to become a major independent landholder and a financial power in her own right. Theodelinda's influence was exceptional, of course, but it was built on a legal foundation that made it possible. And in a quirky twist of history, the name of that world-changing Frankish law, the Salic law, most likely comes from the name of an obscure river, the Sala, in what is now the Netherlands, the ancestral homeland of the Salian Franks. It's a bit like discovering the Constitution was named after a popular local fishing spot. Theodelinda's story, her ability to act as the vessel of legitimacy and as the ultimate kingmaker, is therefore not just a story about a remarkable woman. It is the product of a uniquely Lombard legal and political environment. Her spectacular career simply could not have happened 50 miles over the Alps. Theodelinda's influence was not confined to the internal politics of the Lombard kingdom. Her unique position and her Chalcedonian faith made her the primary diplomatic channel to the other great powers of Italy, and her most important correspondent resided in Rome. This was not a fellow monarch, but a man who wielded a different, and in some ways greater power, Pope Gregory I, known to history as Gregory the Great. To call Gregory a mere pope is to dramatically undersell him. He was a brilliant theologian, a tireless administrator who organized Rome's defenses and food supply, and a cunning statesman. Pope Gregory the Great was the ultimate multitasker. One minute he's writing a foundational work of Christian doctrine, the next he's negotiating with the Byzantine emperor's representative, and in the afternoon he's trying to secure a fragile peace with the Arian Lombards who sat on his doorstep. For Gregory, the Lombards were a constant threat, a danger to his city and to the souls of all Italy. And so, a correspondence begins. The letters that passed between Queen Theodelinda in Pavia and Pope Gregory in Rome are some of the most fascinating documents of the age. They are the 6th century equivalent of a declassified series of emails between two world leaders. On the surface, they are filled with pious encouragement. Gregory praises Theodelinda for her faith, for her virtue, and most of all, for her success in having her son, the heir Adaloald, baptized into the Chalcedonian faith. But beneath the polite spiritual language, a deft political negotiation is taking place. Gregory sees Theodelinda as his crucial ally within the enemy camp, a force for moderation who can restrain the more aggressive Lombard dukes. Theodelinda, in turn, uses her warm relationship with the most revered man in Italy to enhance the legitimacy of her family's rule. Historians debate the balance of power in this correspondence. Was Theodelinda a devout but passive student, grateful for the guidance of the great pope? Or was she a shrewd and equal partner in diplomacy, skillfully leveraging Gregory's desire for peace to win prestige and security for her kingdom? The truth is likely somewhere in the middle. Their relationship was mutually beneficial. Gregory's signature diplomatic move was the sending of gifts, particularly holy relics. Getting a letter from the Pope was a big deal. But getting a letter that also contained, as one of Gregory's did, tiny filings from the actual chains believed to have bound St. Peter, all enclosed within a golden key. That's how you knew you were on the A-list of 6th century diplomacy. These were not just trinkets. They were powerful symbols of Gregory's favor and a physical link to the authority of the apostles themselves. This long-distance partnership had real-world consequences that shaped Lombard policy. It helped secure a series of truces between the Lombards and their Roman neighbors, reducing the endemic warfare that had plagued Italy. It undoubtedly influenced the legal status and protection of Chalcedonian churches and their vast properties within the Lombard kingdom. And it set the monarchy on an irreversible path toward mainstream Catholicism. With her pen, her piety, and her sharp political mind, Theodelinda was not just managing a kingdom. She was helping to redraw the religious and political map of the entire Italian peninsula. Theodelinda's support for the Chalcedonian faith went far beyond a polite and politically useful correspondence with the Pope. Her strategy was far more tangible, more permanent. She understood that power and legitimacy needed to be built into the very landscape of the kingdom. It needed to be expressed not just in letters and laws, but in bricks and mortar. And so you see her ambitions given physical form in the town of Monza, which she transforms into her personal royal and religious capital. Her centerpiece project is the foundation of a magnificent basilica dedicated to St. John the Baptist. Paul the Deacon, ever the fan of a good story, gives us a charming foundation myth for it. He writes that while Theodelinda was out walking, a dove appeared and spoke to her in Latin saying modo, meaning here. The queen is said to have replied etiam, meaning yes, and the combination of the two words gave the town its ancient name, Modo Etia. You know you've reached a certain level of influence when even the local wildlife starts dispensing divine real estate advice. The talking dove says to build the basilica here is a very difficult argument for any royal planning committee to counter. This act of patronage was, of course, an expression of genuine piety, but it was also a masterstroke of political, economic, and legal strategy. Building a grand church was a statement of stability. It told the world the Lombards were no longer a migrating warband. They were a permanent dynasty, building for the ages. But the real genius was in how it solidified her family's legal and territorial claims. To found a church, you must endow it with land to provide for its upkeep. Theodelinda endowed her new basilica at Monza with vast tracts of land, all drawn from her personal dowry and Morgengabe properties. This simple act had profound legal consequences. It is one thing for a rival Lombard duke to try and seize a piece of the queen's personal property through a feud or a legal challenge. It is another thing entirely to seize land that now legally belongs to St. John the Baptist. By donating her own property to the church, she was effectively sanctifying her ownership of it, placing it under divine protection. It's the 6th century equivalent of putting your most valuable assets into a trust fund that's managed by God himself. It's a pretty secure investment. Archaeologists and architectural historians still debate whether the churches built under Lombard patronage represent a true fusion of Germanic and late Roman artistic styles, or if they were largely just the work of Italian craftsmen whose salaries were now being paid with Lombard gold. But the political effect is undisputed. The bishops, abbots, and priests who ran the churches and monasteries she founded owed their jobs, their land, and their influence directly to her. While the loyalty of a Lombard duke was always conditional, the abbot of a monastery that you just created and endowed with 5,000 acres of prime farmland, he is going to be your biggest fan for life. Theodelinda was weaving her family's authority into the sacred fabric of the kingdom, creating a loyal and permanent institutional power base that would long outlast her. You step back and look at the cumulative effect of Theodelinda's life, a career of influence that spanned nearly half a century. With her first husband, Rothari, she helped forge a fragile alliance. With her second, Agilulf, she tamed the rebellious dukes, established a secure dynasty, and built a kingdom. As a widow and regent for her son, she held that kingdom together. It was a remarkable political achievement. You can't write a national constitution while the country is still in the middle of a civil war. You have to wait for the dust to settle. Theodelinda's long reign was, in essence, a 50-year-long dust-settling period. But beneath the surface of this newfound political stability, the old legal chaos still churned. The clumsy, contradictory system of dual laws and unwritten, half-remembered customs remained the law of the land. The kingdom was now strong enough and stable enough to finally address this foundational weakness. Theodelinda is like the brilliant but uncredited co-founder of a major company. She built the entire infrastructure, pacified the shareholders, stabilized the finances, and fostered the key talent. Then, a new CEO comes in a decade after her death, slaps his name on the company's first blockbuster product, and gets all the credit in the history books. The man who finally undertakes this monumental task, the CEO in our analogy, is King Rothari. In the year 643, he promulgates the Edictum Rothari, the Edict of Rothari, the very first written compilation of Lombard laws. It is a landmark moment, but it is a moment that would have been impossible without the state building of the preceding decades. Rothari inherited a kingdom. Theodelinda had to build one. Rothari could issue a law for all Lombards because Theodelinda had been instrumental in creating the very idea of all Lombards as a single political entity. The edict itself is a fascinating document. Before it gets to a single law, its preamble consists of a long, mind-numbing genealogy of King Rothari himself, tracing his ancestry back 17 generations. It's like opening a foundational legal document and first having to read, I, the son of Nanding, who was the son of Noctso, who was the son of Aduso, and on and on. This isn't just vanity. It's a critical assertion of legitimacy in the Germanic tradition, proving his authority to make law by demonstrating his impeccable, semi-mythical bloodline. Historians still debate the extent of Rothari's legal innovation. How much of his edict was a bold creation of new laws suited for a new time, And how much was he acting as a conservative secretary, simply writing down the ancient oral customs, the wergild tariffs, the rules for ordeals as accurately as possible? The truth is that it was both. But the very act of writing it down in Latin for the whole kingdom to see was a revolution. And it was a revolution that could only happen on the foundations of the stable, unified state that Theodelinda had dedicated her life and her dowry to building. Rothari may have signed the law, but Theodelinda built the kingdom the law was for. But before King Rothari could put his name to the law, there was the original succession plan, the grand culmination of Theodelinda's entire life's work. Her husband, Agilulf, dies in 616. Their son, Adalawald, is still a boy. Theodelinda does not retire to a convent. The Lombard dukes do not try to seize power. Such is her prestige and authority that she seamlessly transitions into the role of Queen Regent, ruling the kingdom on her son's behalf. This is the "I'll just do it myself" phase of her career. She is no longer just the kingmaker or the power behind the throne. For nearly a decade, she is the throne. When Adalawald finally comes of age and is crowned as the sole ruler, he is on paper the most legitimate king the Lombards have ever had. But his legitimacy is a borrowed light, reflecting the brilliance of his mother. Think about his credentials. He has the revered Leithing blood of his mother, not the respectable but unremarkable lineage of his father. He is the first king to be baptized Chalcedonian Catholic, giving him a direct link to the majority of his subjects and the Pope, a status engineered entirely by his mother. The very army and administration that obey him are funded by a treasury built upon his mother's dowry. Adalawald's claim to the throne is about 10% his father, and 90% my mom is Queen Theodelinda. His entire royal resume is just a cover letter written by her. Theodelinda had even secured the ultimate diplomatic prize to bolster his reign. In a stunning move, she and Agilulf had negotiated for their son to be formally recognized by the Byzantine emperor in Constantinople. For a barbarian king to receive this honor was almost unheard of. It was meant to be the final, unbreachable wall in his political defenses. But the old fault lines in the kingdom, the ones Theodelinda had so carefully tried to pave over, had not disappeared. The Arian faction of the Lombard nobility, the old-school warriors who resented this drift towards Catholicism and Roman ways, saw Adalawald not as a legitimate heir but as a symbol of their culture's slow surrender. In 626, they rose in rebellion, deposed him, and placed an Arian noble on the throne. The sources justifying the coup claim that Adalawald had gone insane. And this brings us to a debate historians still wrestle with. Was the young king truly mentally unstable, or was this a convenient and vicious propaganda story concocted by his rivals to justify deposing a legitimate but religiously and politically inconvenient monarch? It seems like a tragic endnote. After all that work, all that brilliant statecraft, her son is overthrown and her direct dynasty is extinguished. It's a stark reminder that in the 7th century there's no such thing as a plan that's too big to fail. But her true legacy is revealed in what happened next. Nothing. The kingdom did not shatter. The dukes did not descend into a free-for-all civil war. The new king took the throne, and the state, the institution that Theodelinda had so painstakingly built, endured. Her ultimate legacy was not her son but the kingdom itself, which was now finally strong enough to survive even a coup. Though her direct dynasty ended with the fall of her son, Theodelinda's legacy was not erased. It was, in a way, permanently etched into the legal DNA of the very state she had built. To find it, you just have to open the Edict of Rothari. You won't find a chapter titled the Theodelinda Clause, but her influence is like a watermark on every page that deals with property, women, and power. The law code, written a generation after her peak, is a photograph of the world she shaped. Consider the law concerning the Morgengabe, the morning gift. The edict doesn't just mention it, it formalizes it, setting a cap that the gift could be up to 1/4 of the husband's total assets. This is a direct codification of the custom that was the foundation of Theodelinda's own vast personal wealth. The law now officially recognized and regulated the very mechanism that had allowed her to become a queen-maker and the anchor of her husband's throne. It is a legal echo of her own life story. But for every clause that reflects her power, there is another that reflects her legal constraints. The edict also formally codifies the principle of the mundium, or male guardianship. It states clearly that no free woman is permitted to live self mundia, of her own authority. She must be under the legal protection and control of a male relative, her father, her husband, her son, or if she has none, the king himself. So the law states that you can own half a duchy, but you can't sell it or make a contract about it without your guardian's formal consent. It is the ultimate glass ceiling, and it's forged from legally codified patriarchy. And this raises a question legal historians still debate. Was the codification of the mundium a step forward for women by clarifying their rights and offering them defined legal protection? Or was it a step backward, hardening informal customs into rigid law and closing off loopholes that might have existed before? Even the laws of violence reflect this complex status. In a quirky and revealing clause, the edict sets the wergild for the killing of a free woman at 1,200 solidi, an enormous sum, far higher than the price for most men, including some nobles. This wasn't about a sudden surge of chivalry. It was a cold calculation. A free woman of childbearing age was the vessel of her family's future. To kill her was to extinguish a potential lineage, a crime against the entire kin group. It's a bit of a backhanded compliment. We, the law, value you so much as a potential mother to future warriors that killing you will be ruinously expensive. So when you read the edict, you are reading a summary of the world Theodolinda navigated. It's a world that had to legally account for the existence of immensely wealthy and influential noblewomen. It affirms their right to own vast property while simultaneously insisting on their legal subordination to men. Her life was the ultimate case study, and the Edict of Rothari is the evidence of the society that had to reckon with her. And so the story, which began with a nervous princess in a caravan crossing the Alps, comes full circle. We have seen how her dowry, a collection of personal portable property, was masterfully transformed. First, it was the price of an alliance. Then, it became the anchor for a shaky throne, buying loyalty and funding the armies that forged a unified state. That unified state, in turn, created the stability necessary to finally confront the kingdom's legal chaos, paving the way for a written law code that would echo with the precedents of her life. She took a kingdom that was basically a chaotic venture capital-funded startup run by feuding warlords and, over half a century, helped turn it into a semi-respectable, functioning state. It's one of the most successful turnaround stories of the Dark Ages. This leaves us with the final debate that surrounds all great historical figures. To what extent was Theodolinda a visionary architect with a grand plan to Romanize and Catholicize her kingdom versus a brilliant and pragmatic improviser reacting to one crisis after another with incredible skill? Was she playing a long game of four-dimensional chess, or was she just really, really good at checkers? The truth is, when you are that successful for that long, the results start to look a lot like genius either way. She left behind two legacies, one of legend and one of law. The legend is that of the pious queen, the friend of the Pope, the builder of the great church at Monza where a talking dove told her to build. This is the Theodolinda, who became a figure of folklore. After her death, she was buried in her basilica, and her reputation for sanctity was so great that for centuries, pilgrims would chip away small pieces of her sarcophagus to use as holy relics, believing them to have healing powers. But her other legacy, the one forged in law and politics, is quieter and more profound. It's the stable kingdom, the tamed aristocracy, the legal precedents for female property, and the irreversible turn toward a new cultural identity. The legend gets you folk songs and sainthood. The legal and political groundwork gets you a stable tax base. We know which one is more fun to sing about, but we also know which one truly builds a nation. The chaotic, misty world we entered at the beginning of our story, a world of unwritten rules and casual violence, has been transformed. It is more ordered, more stable, and more deeply connected to the older, grander traditions of Rome and the Church. And at the very heart of that transformation, you find the wealth, the will, and the wisdom of a single Lombard queen. And with that, our long journey through the misty valleys and smoky halls of Lombardy finally comes to its quiet end. The intricate details of the law codes can begin to soften and dissolve, and the sharp clang of the blacksmith S-hammer can fade into the gentle hum of your own quiet room. The great historical forces and the weight of a queen's decisions can recede, leaving behind only the calm and the stillness of the present moment. You can feel the rough woolen cloak of the past slip from your shoulders, replaced by the familiar comfort of your own surroundings. You have walked through a world of feuds and fortunes, of poison and prayer, but that world is far away now, and you are safe and sound, right here. Thank you for spending this time with me tonight, for lending me your imagination for this small slice of a long-forgotten world. All that is left to do now is to let the last of these images drift away, to allow your mind to become quiet and still, and to ease into a well-deserved and peaceful rest.